Hello and welcome to Reptiles and Research. So in today's video we're going to talk about bearded dragon supplements. So before we go into what supplements I'm going to recommend and show you how to use them, you need to understand why we even need supplements to begin with and what it even does in a bearded dragon's body. So the main supplement we're going to talk about is calcium. Most animals with a backbone need twice as much calcium in their blood as phosphorus. Now what that means is basically you have a 2-to-1 ratio of calcium to phosphorus in your blood. Calcium is really important for like neurons to even fire in the brain, muscle fibers to even contract, loads of things in the body of a bearded dragon and most other things with a backbone. Calcium is really important. The phosphorus is really important as well, and that has uses in the body, but at the lower ratio in that blood to the calcium. Now, bearded dragons have a really cool survival mechanism. So when they're in the wild, if they go through periods where they just can't get any calcium, what they do is they draw calcium out of their bone storage, and that floats around freely in the blood plasma again, and it bumps up that ratio so that it can be used for daily functioning of the bearded dragon's body. And that's a really cool and efficient way of that bearded dragon going through hard times and surviving it. And then when they come out of those hard times and they get access to calcium in the wild, what they'll do is they'll replenish those bone storages and lay that back in the bone. But what happens in captivity, or in the wild if it were to happen, over long periods of time, and that short survival mechanism kind of plays against them. So if it's a long prolonged period of time, rather than being like a short drawing out and then it fixing, they never ever get enough calcium, so they're constantly drawing and drawing and drawing more and more calcium out of their bones. And what that does over the long haul, it means it can cause bones to go really rubbery and not really have much strength. It can cause hairline fractures in bones because they become really weak and they can easily break. It means that bones can like bend and get really bad. And that's where you get a lot of metabolic bone disease, where you see bones bending and spines cricking and jaw bones going really funny. That's because the bones are going really, really soft and they're going awry. And then you've basically got metabolic bone disease, which you can't really fix really in the same way that you would get it back to 100% how it was. So basically, even if they've got a bendy bone now, if you're like, oh my God, I'm not supplying enough calcium, and you give them calcium now, the bone doesn't straighten. All that happens is you relay calcium on top of that bone and it fixes in that bent position. So you really want to avoid getting into this scenario in the first place. And luckily for you, even though I probably just scared you a little bit, is it's really easy to avoid if you do it properly. So in their diet, they need to get that calcium, but they also need their bugs. And what's funny about the bugs is they don't have bones, which means they themselves don't store calcium. They have an exoskeleton because they're insects. So they're actually really high in phosphorus. So they need to eat these bugs, but they're really high in phosphorus. But they need twice as much calcium. So when in captivity, we supplied calcium powders on these bugs to make sure that our bearded dragons are getting more calcium than phosphorus, and they get nice healthy growth and they stay healthy. And you might ask, well, who is supplementing them in the wild? Who is sprinkling powders on their bugs? And the answer to that question is because in the wild, they're eating plants that got really high, dense amounts of calcium in them. In some instances, Beardy Vet, the vet that studies them in the wild, found that there was 20 times the amount of calcium in some of these plants as there was phosphorus. So overall, their wild diet, they're getting really high levels of calcium compared to that phosphorus, and that's how they live really healthy lives. But what we're doing in captivity is we're just putting some calcium powder on our bugs just to remedy that situation. So my first recommendation would be to provide some calcium on every single insect you feed your bearded dragon. Pure calcium is a really good one, not a multivitamin, just calcium. Provide that on your bugs and you should be good to go. Now you can't really overdose on the calcium. The amount of calcium that you would truly need to overdose a bearded dragon is astronomical. You would need to be shoveling calcium into the animal. So realistically, you're not going to do it. So you can provide calcium every single time you feed a bug, no problem. Another way of doing this is instead of just calcium, you can provide something like the Earth Pro A from Arcadia. Now, this is quite cool. It's mostly calcium to the point where it's really high in calcium, but it has other things in it. So everything in this is either a precursor to something else or it's basically water soluble. So the difference between water soluble and fat soluble vitamins is that if something's water soluble and we've got too much of it in our bodies, we basically just excrete it out via urine. But if it's fat soluble, it accumulates in our fat tissues, and if we have too much of it, we can basically reach toxic levels. But everything in this supplement is basically water soluble, so you can't really overdose, and then everything else is a precursor to something else. So things like vitamin A you can reach toxic levels of, but in this supplement it's carotenoids and beta carotenoids. So beta carotenoids can be consumed by beta dragon, and they in themselves can convert that into vitamin A in their bodies to the amount they need. But you cannot overdose on the carotenoids, so it's safer to give them the carotenoids as much as they want, and they'll convert as much as they want. They won't convert too much to become toxic because they have control over that. So basically you can provide this with all the extra little bits in here that'll be good for your beta dragon alongside the calcium, or you can just do the calcium as your every single time you feed bugs. If you're feeding your beta dragons a varied diet of different greens and different bug species, each different bug species have got different properties. They might have different amino acid structures. They might have different amounts of vitamin E. They might have different... They're just completely different. So providing a variety, rotation of different bugs is what's going to be good for giving your beta dragon a nice, healthy, balanced diet. I did my dissertation thesis on gut-loading crickets, and I can tell you even the species of cricket is different. So make sure you provide different insects, because that's really going to give them a well-rounded diet. Now, once every 2 weeks, you can provide something like a multivitamin powder. So these multivitamin powders are synthetic and man-made, but they're actually really strong. So they do have the full end result vitamins like vitamin A and vitamin D and things like that you can overdose on. So we only want to provide that one feeding on one amount of bugs once every sort of like 2 weeks. And that's only just to come in after to make sure we fill in any holes, a little safety blanket to like bump up some vitamins and minerals that they might need, or any nutrient they might need, and provide that sort of like margin for error. You don't need to go any more than that. That should be enough if you're providing a well-balanced, varied diet. The last thing that I would like to recommend is something that not a lot of people talk about, but that is Vermex. So I'll let you see that. So Vermex is essentially a probiotic supplement for gut flora in a beta dragon's guts. So beta dragons obviously eat a lot of vegetation, and as being a species that eats a lot of vegetation, they need a really healthy gut flora and a really nice microbiome to help them break down cellulose and different parts of the vegetation they eat. So providing this supplement, you can give them a probiotic that's really good at encouraging growth of a really healthy gut for the beta dragon. Again, the instructions on this is to do it on the first 3 days of every month. But I see no reason why you couldn't just give it to them once every 14 days in a little amount in the same time that you do your multivitamin. It's very, very simple. Either pure calcium, or you can go for like the Earth Pro A stuff because it's got other nice things in it that you can't overdose on. Every single time that you feed bugs, you don't have to worry about whether the calcium contains vitamin D or doesn't contain vitamin D, because beta dragons don't have the bile acids that allows them to consume and absorb vitamin D orally. They have to do it through the skin under UV. So it doesn't really matter whether your calcium has vitamin D or it doesn't. So if you're trying desperately to find one without vitamin D and you can only find with vitamin D, it'll be alright. Like you can't really overdose it on them because they can't really use it that well anyway. So either with or without vitamin D and calcium, and then either the Earth Pro A, and then once every 2 weeks, your multivitamin, and if you want to get it, your Vermex, and you're good to go. That's essentially what I would do for beta dragons, and typically is what I do for a lot of other species as well. But we're talking about beta dragons here, and that is basically my guide to supplementing your beta dragon. We have plenty of other beta dragon guides on this channel, so if you want to go and check that out, I recommend doing that. Thanks for coming aboard, and I'll see you in the next video.